Hello and welcome. Today we're doing something a little different. We're putting our own brains on trial. We're going to uncover this hidden force that quietly dictates what we believe, a lot of times without us even having a clue. You ever wonder about this? It's a huge question, especially today. How can two people look at the exact same set of facts, the same evidence, and walk away with totally opposite conclusions? Is it really about who's smarter or who's more logical? Or is there something else going on? Something deeper and way more emotional? To really get to the heart of this, we've got to go back in time to a trial that completely mesmerized and, let's be honest, divided an entire country. The O.J. Simpson case? It was more than just a legal battle. It became this massive, real-world experiment in how we see evidence and decide what's true. So here's the puzzle. The prosecution laid out this mountain of evidence, right? But the jury came back with not guilty. So why? Well, it turns out the decision wasn't just about the facts, the DNA, the glove, all of that. It was about how those facts were weighed against two really powerful emotions. On one hand, this general fondness for OJ the celebrity, and on the other, a very real, historically justified distrust of the LAPD. So how on earth does that happen? How can feelings about a person or an institution seem to just overpower cold, hard facts? It's not as simple as just wishful thinking. No, it's actually a specific psychological quirk that's running in the background for every single one of us all the time. And the name for this quirk, the concept that really unlocks this whole puzzle, is called motivated reasoning. You can think of it as your brain's secret motive, like a hidden director calling the shots behind the scenes of your conscious thoughts.
So, to put it simply, motivated reasoning is basically your brain putting a thumb on the scale. It's this unconscious bias that nudges us to embrace any information that supports what we already want to be true and to find reasons to dismiss anything that challenges our beliefs.
Now, the engine that makes this all run is something called emotional coherence. See, our minds don't just want a story that makes logical sense. They crave a story where our feelings and the facts all line up nicely. So we subconsciously weave them together until the whole narrative just feels right. It gets rid of that nagging, uncomfortable feeling of inner conflict. Okay, let's bring this down to a more personal level with an example from the source material. Imagine a guy named Quinn. He starts having chest pains. Now, he's got two possible conclusions. The preferred one, it's just indigestion. That brings relief. The threatening one, oh no, it's heart disease. That brings fear. So Quinn is now motivated to find any little sign that points to indigestion and to explain away any symptom that feels a bit too much like the scary alternative. His desire to avoid fear is literally steering his thinking. And this, right here, is the bottom line. It isn't that we're consciously deciding to ignore the facts. It's that our motivations, what we want, what we're afraid of, who we're loyal to, they act like a filter that changes how we see those facts in the first place.
Okay, so this process doesn't just happen with things like personal health scares. It actually scales up in a huge way when our emotions and, this is the big one, our identities are on the line. And this tends to play out in two main ways. First, you've got the identity pattern. This is where we are motivated to believe anything that makes us feel more connected to a group we care about. Our political party, our country, you name it. And second is the emotions pattern. We just naturally lean towards beliefs that make us feel good, like pride, and we shy away from beliefs that make us feel bad, like fear or guilt. And this brings us to a really critical point. Motivated reasoning isn't something we just do on our own. It's a team sport, and it gets way more powerful when we're in groups.
Think about it. We usually get our news and information from people who are already in our circle, right? Our friends, our social media feeds. This creates a kind of echo chamber that doesn't just spread information, but also shared feelings and goals. When everyone around you feels the same way, the motivation to stick with a certain conclusion becomes incredibly strong. And what you get is a shared reality where my team's truth feels like the only truth.
So this is where it gets really important to understand. The source material we're drawing from uses this exact framework to analyze how people come to believe what they do about major social and political events. And just to be clear, this is a way to understand the psychology at play, not to take sides.
So let's look at the examples from the source. For Brexit, the analysis points straight to that identity pattern.
The motivation was tied to a really powerful sense of national identity, a pride in being British that could make the idea of being European feel like a threat. This emotional identity became a huge motivator that shaped how economic arguments were seen. In a similar way, the source explains QAnon through the lens of both group identity, a really strong allegiance to a political figure, and powerful, fear-driven emotions aimed at opponents. The beliefs, no matter how extreme they seem from the outside, served the emotional and identity-based needs of the group.
Okay, so if this is just how our brains are wired, are we doomed to be stuck in our biases forever? Not at all. Let's talk about building a toolkit to help us think a little more critically. So look, the goal here isn't to become some kind of perfectly logical robot. That's just not possible. Our emotions are a key part of how we think. The real goal is awareness. It's about learning to spot the pull of motivated reasoning and then consciously building better mental habits to deal with it. So here's a practical two-step approach you can actually use. First, you just have to identify the potential error. Ask yourself, is this strong feeling I have coming from the evidence itself, or is it coming from my identity? Am I rejecting this idea because it's actually wrong, or just because it makes me feel uncomfortable? Then, step 2 is to replace that impulse. Go out and actively look for the other side. Ask yourself, okay, honestly, what evidence would it take for me to change my mind on this? But what about trying to change someone else's mind? Well, this quote from Paul Thagard, the author of our source material, is absolutely crucial. Just hammering someone with facts when their identity is all tangled up in a belief, it's like throwing water on a grease fire. It usually just makes things worse because you're not just challenging a fact anymore. You're challenging who they are as a person. So what can you do? This source suggests a much more empathetic approach called motivational interviewing. Instead of attacking the belief head-on, you ask these open, non-threatening questions that help the person explore their own reasons and feelings. You might ask things like, what do you value most about being part of this community? Or how does holding this belief affect your life? It's all about encouraging them to think for themselves, not about you winning a debate. All right, let's wrap this up with the key takeaways. First, motivated reasoning isn't a flaw. It's a fundamental part of being human. Second, it's fueled by our deepest emotions, our fears, and our need to belong. Third, this scales all the way up from a tiny personal choice to massive social movements. And finally, the most powerful tool we have against its downsides is simply becoming aware of it, in ourselves and in others. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. I want you to consider a strong belief that you hold, one that's probably tied to your identity. What would it look like to try and step outside of your own motivation for a minute and just look at it with fresh eyes? What belief of yours is worth putting on trial today?